Major support for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Have you enjoyed any of the Carolina beaches this summer? It's a tradition for thousands of families every season. But the shoreline of the Carolina coast is home to more than sun and fun. It's the epicenter of one of the Carolina's economic engines, the ports. I'm Maura Quinn, in for Chris William. Thank you for joining me for Carolina Business Review, the most widely watched source for business and public policy issues across North and South Carolina. Coming up, the challenges of growing infrastructure that keeps pace with the evolving demands of one of the state's vital enterprises.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina. Please visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Barings, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Scott Baier of Clemson University, Newell Clark, Mayor of Lexington, and special guest Pamela Lackey, Chair of the South Carolina Ports Authority Board.
So summer is winding down, and as the summer winds down, we start to get reports, and we have gotten a jobs report, and that tells us that gives us some insights into how the economy is going. So Scott, I want to start with you. You've had a chance to really dig into this jobs report. Can you tell me whether there were some surprises in that for you?
Yes, I think one of the surprises came in the headline numbers. Both the number of jobs created came in higher than what was anticipated at 209,000 compared to 180,000 that was expected, and the unemployment rate ticked a little bit lower at 4.3%. The one thing I think is encouraging that I haven't heard much play on is that one of the bigger gains in employment was in the leisure and hospitality industry. That has a lot to do with people's discretionary spending, so if that industry is expanding, it must mean that people have an optimistic view of what's coming up in terms of economic outlook, that they're spending money on discretionary things like that. And retail employment also increased. And as we know, there's been some concern about retail sales and retail employment and the retail industry in general.
Okay, so Newell, what do you think this means for some of the smaller towns, the smaller communities in our states?
Well, it's actually exciting because, I mean, to echo what Scott said, I mean, we're seeing that. We're seeing in our retail jobs, we're seeing in our tourism, it's actually up, the dollars being spent in our community, people coming to visit us, and that always helps because when you're building the economy, I tell our citizens all the time, you know, if I give you $1, we're just exchanging $1, but when we can import some dollars into our community, that's going to help us grow. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing that happen, and our numbers are continuing to increase. And you wonder sometimes in your community, you're like, well, is this special to us, or is this happening within the region and in the state? And as I start talking to other elected officials around the state, they're seeing the same thing. We're seeing home sales. Our real estate market is really getting busy. I'm being told by some of our realtors it's the busiest they've seen it in 30 years. And so it was one of those things, like Scott said, you know, the numbers were surprising, but for me, it kind of settled me in the sense of we feel like a lot of positive things are happening, and this just kind of mirrored what we're seeing.
So you're feeling that optimism.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and to echo those sentiments, I think both in North and South Carolina, this is a place where people are relocating to. And so as home sales go up, it supports retail sales because people still feel uncomfortable about when it comes to buying home furnishings online. So you're going to see that type of support in this area, and I think that's why notably South Carolina and North Carolina have done very well in terms of retail employment and retail sales.
So talk to me about the Fed. So what does this mean about for the federal government?
Yeah, so I think it was, in some sense, the catchphrase is the Goldilocks report, in the sense that the job numbers were good, signifying robust economic growth, or economic growth between 2 and 2.5%. Wage growth was modest, about 2.5%. I think it was 2.5% year over year. So this will give no reason for the Fed to feel like they have to hurry up and raise interest rates sooner than they think, or feel like they have to take another round of quantitative easing. They could kind of sit back and digest the numbers and then adjust accordingly.
Okay.
Good report for the Fed.
Good report for the Fed. So let's talk about something, though, that happened in South Carolina that could have some ripple effects, though. There was news of the shutdown of the nuclear plant that was being built in upstate South Carolina. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, it's a classic example in the economics world of a sunk cost, in the sense of, when looking forward, the reactor was going to cost roughly $25 billion, and they've already sunk $10 billion in, and given where the costs were going and the time overruns and the changing demands for energy, it didn't look like it was going to be cost effective, and so they halted the project. The downside of that, there's 5,000 people now that have lost their jobs and now need to be reemployed. Our labor market has been pretty dynamic. I hope it can absorb those people. The state's taking the right steps. They're holding a job fair August 14th. So some of the big employers are going to come in and hopefully help those people relocate and match positions with skills. So it's not a good thing, but hopefully it'll ease out.
So Newell, you're the mayor of a relatively, of a mid-sized community, and what advice would you have for them? You have experience in this area.
Well, the number, you hear 5,000, you lump in your throat.
Scary.
We lost close to 10,000 furniture and textile jobs when the downturn happened in the economy, and we have since replaced those jobs and continue to grow. And it really was about diversification. And that's one of the things that we talk to our young people about in our community, particularly in terms of education, is as you're going through your education, you want to be as diverse as you can be. You want to have transferable skills, because it's something that's going to happen, and business is going to make business decisions, and it's what's going to be best for their profitability, and that's understandable in the economy. But as an employee, as you're going through, you want to make sure that you can, if something like this does happen and that decision is made, where can I fall back? And we've been very fortunate around the Triad area in North Carolina that we've had, as you said, a kind of robust job market and a lot of things happening, a lot of businesses making investments there. And it's interesting because you actually see a lot of the millennials in terms, they're bouncing around from job to job. You know, they'll stay somewhere for 2 years and then they go try something else. So it's different than what we've seen in the past, staying at a job for 20 or 30 years. But I think that is so key. Not only in terms of a small community, diversifying your economy so that things can balance itself and go through a downturn, but as individuals, we got to balance ourselves in terms of our education.
And for the governments too, I believe it's also important for the governments to invest in people. People's skills are fairly malleable, that they can acquire skills pretty easily. So if we're going to channel funds into that area, it should go to the people, not as much to the region or to that project. So I would like to see the government, hopefully the government funds go into developing the skills of the individuals who have lost their jobs, or finding them jobs in the same area, just different location.
Yeah. So, Newell, you work a lot in education. Education is very important to you, education and C. So tell us about what some of the up-and-coming jobs are that you see that we should be investing in.
Well, it's interesting because we were talking earlier about hospitality and service and those sort of things, and I think for a long time, if you're in North Carolina, you think of the coast, you think of the mountains, and you think, okay, that's where people are going to vacation, but we're seeing it all across our state. People are going for hikes, they're going on all these creeks and rivers and kayaking and those sort of things. So that's a job market that in the past we really didn't look at, and you think of service, and 21st century skills are so important. being able to communicate. It's not just knowing your math and sciences and those sort of things. We just had a company that came to Lexington in Davidson County, made an announcement. It's Edgar, and they do manufacturing. And when we sat down with them, they said they weren't looking for university degreed employees. They're looking for associate degrees. And we have a strong community college program across North Carolina, and that's another area for young people to look into. Those manufacturing hands-on skills, we're losing that labor force, and we're seeing more demand for that than ever. And you know, if you've got a passion for the sciences, without question, that's where you go. But I think the job markets that we're seeing in smaller communities tend to have more of technical skill, and that background is needed.
Yeah. Are you seeing that across the both states? You're seeing investment in this kind of job?
Well, in those type of jobs, just because of the nature of the states and what the states have to offer in terms of their geography, but also I think some of the demographics are drivers as well. So with an aging population, we're seeing a lot of growth in health services and that. But one of the big things I tell the students as they come through is that, you know, what employers are looking for is the ability to communicate and problem-solving skills. Those are the key things I think that students need to develop while they're in school. And again, a diversity in terms of their education and their training is important.
Okay. It's so key. I mean, real life, real world stuff is solving problems. And a lot of times in the classroom, we don't focus on that as much. And I'm seeing a lot of PBL, project-based learning. You're getting kids and they're immersing in their education, their English, their math, it's all coming together, it's integrated. And I mean, that's the way it works out there in the real world. And then that's going to help the student be more transferable as we see these downturns in the economy. Yeah.
So I want to bring someone else into our conversation. We're going to do that in just a second. But first I want to tell you about what's coming up on Carolina Business Review in the next few weeks. We're going to see some really impactful guests. We're going to have Lou Kennedy coming up. She is president and CEO and owner of Nephron Pharmaceuticals, and she'll be here. And we also have Dale Falwell, who is the North Carolina State Treasurer. So much to talk about as the summer moves into fall, so we don't want you to miss any of the programs that are coming up. So our guest, she's special. She's a woman of myriad talents, an educator, a businesswoman, and a leader in South Carolina. Pam Lackey can speak with authority about education. She worked in the South Carolina Department of Education and is currently a co-chair of the Transform South Carolina Education Initiative. Pam is also the chair of the South Carolina State Chamber of Commerce and is also the chair of the South Carolina Ports Authority Board. In her spare time, she has a day job. She's the state president of AT&T South Carolina. So Pam, you're a slacker. I'm telling you, can you, really, you are a
Well, you misrepresented me a little bit. I'm past chair of the state chamber.
Oh,
So,
past chair of the state. Oh, well, whatever. We're going to have to find you something else to do because you clearly have so much spare time, right?
She's been resting.
She's been resting. Right, so we'll find you something else to do. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start by talking some about the ports. Really important industry for the state. And so let's talk a little bit about the important investments that are being made in infrastructure. So it's a little bit of a conflict of uses in some ways because the ports really need this infrastructure to move the goods and services, and then, but it's hard to try to find the way to invest in that infrastructure. Can you talk about that a little bit, about the infrastructure investments that need to be made to accommodate the ports, so vital to the state of South Carolina?
Well, thank you for that. And actually, probably my little bit of quizzical look was based on the fact that in South Carolina, you're right, we need to invest heavily in the ports because the Port of South Carolina is responsible for 1 in 11 jobs.
Yep.
In South Carolina, over $53 billion impact on the state's economy. So it is a huge driver of economic growth in the state of South Carolina for sure, and I'm sure in other states as well. My quizzical look was that, in fact, South Carolina made the commitment to invest in the infrastructure of the port so that we would be ready for the growth that we've seen and the growth that we see for the future. We actually, the General Assembly of South Carolina said when they found out what it would cost to deepen the harbor of Charleston to 52 feet, they went ahead and set aside the money for that. Great. And said, in case there is not money at the federal level, we're going to commit to that. And in fact, we are starting on that deepening project already halfway through the process and starting on it. It'll be a really active work going on starting even this fall. So yes, it does take the commitment to do it, but you've got to do it. I mean, we've seen 10% growth in we're talking about the growth in the economy in general. That's a big indicator. 10% growth in the volume of containers coming through the Charleston port over the last year.
Yeah. Talk to me about the road system, trying to get those containers out of the ports and into the country.
There are a lot of ways to do that. We all go, oh, let's don't have more traffic on the roads. And all of our states are investing in repaving roads and certainly in making the roads safer in rural areas as well. And we have this past year passed a roads bill in South Carolina, an infrastructure bill to do that. But there are other ways to look at it too. How do you alleviate that issue, and how do you take care of that cargo and those containers? In South Carolina, about several years ago, we opened the inland port at Greer. And all the BMWs that go through the Port of Charleston, as well as a number of other types of pieces of imports and exports, come through that port, that inland port, by rail. So when that opened up, that took 50,000, I believe it was, 50,000 trucks off the interstate. Now we've seen growth, so it may not feel like that when you're riding down the interstate, but we have taken those off and have recently announced and started this fall on building a second inland port at Dillon, South Carolina, so on the North Carolina-South Carolina border. And it's unbelievable the amount of containers and traffic and exports and imports that have gone through the Greer port in much faster pace than was anticipated to start with. So they're useful.
Inland ports are a very interesting concept.
Yes.
And how is the Dillon port being perceived by your cohorts in North Carolina?
I don't know. I haven't asked them that question. I hope they will look at it as an asset, those people who are in business in North Carolina, because it's right there across the border, and the rail lines go both directions, from that inland port, both south and north. So it'll be an asset for all of us.
Okay.
You've discussed the growth in the volume of the ports coming through in the last year, so you haven't noticed much impact regarding the trade policy uncertainty that's emanating from Washington. You're seeing the steady growth in trade, exports and imports.
Well, as I said, 10% growth. Any of us would love to have that type of growth in our business, whatever our business is, especially in the last year. And that's steadily grown since about 2006 or 7. It's steadily grown, but is now at that rate. So we're really excited about it. And I'm not an expert on the federal policies on imports and exports, so I probably shouldn't answer that question.
That's fine.
Well, you were asking about North Carolina. I mean, last year the citizens of North Carolina passed a referendum. We did a bond of over $2 billion to invest in that infrastructure of rail and our ports and those sort of things. I kind of would ask you, what's your advice to our leaders when those dollars are there? Where do we need to focus those dollars to really get to continue that growth and those sort of things? Well,
I think that's a North Carolina dependent question, certainly. Sure. But you have to look at the assessment. Where is it that your infrastructure is weak today, perhaps? Is it the condition of the roads? Is it more roads access, more off ramps, whatever, or is it your rural infrastructure that's getting goods to those ports and those warehouses and those distribution centers to get them to from your employer? So I think you have to do an assessment of your own state and determine where is the best place to invest that.
Sounds good.
So there is a question that I need to ask you about an investigation that's being done into the Ports Authority and by the FBI, and I want to know whether this is a distraction for the Ports Authority over the firing of a senior vice president who is now running for governor. So I don't want to ask you any questions about the investigation, but is this kind of thing, does this become a distraction for the work of the Port Authority?
Well, obviously I'm not going to comment on any type of legal investigation or any legal matter. However, the port is very focused on meeting the needs of our customers and meeting the needs of the citizens of South Carolina. So we will continue to do that and do that today in a very focused way. We have an extremely good team, executive team and executive director and CEO who keep everybody focused on how do we meet the needs of the customers and the citizens of South Carolina and elsewhere.
Okay, good.
One of the questions I did want to ask you, we were talking a little bit off camera before about education, and I know that's something you're passionate about. I am as well. The difficulties that we're having sometimes, however, is how do we focus and educate our kids on jobs that might not exist in the 21st century, and infrastructure, delivery, you know, all of those sort of things. Sometimes these aren't the jobs that kids thought about, and that sort of thing. But what are some advice or ideas of things that you've seen that you would say, you know, in terms of educating kids for the 21st century?
And I heard you talking earlier in the program, so you know a lot about this too, Mr. Mayor, for sure. I work with a group called Transform South Carolina. It's a group of business leaders who have partnered with educators and public officials as well as citizens in the communities in South Carolina. And our goal is to transform the South Carolina K-12 system of education into one that does produce 90% of the students to be career, college, and citizenship ready when they graduate. I actually brought the profile of the South Carolina graduate that the business community worked with the educators on. And you alluded to what that's all about. You know, when our education system that exists today was designed 140-something years ago, I believe, right. It was designed for the system, the economy that we had at the time. It was primarily a manufacturing, agricultural economy where we had, for 50% of the bell curve. Professor, I know you're familiar with that. We're all been victims of it in our careers in education. Yeah, exactly. The bell curve, where 50% of the folks can succeed and 50% don't necessarily meet the needs or meet the expectations of the education system. That worked because we had jobs for those 50%. You know, the agricultural community, you had strong back was the primary criteria for a job, and manufacturing, could you do the same thing over and over again? You know, well. So those jobs this economy is so different now, as you mentioned, with not only the millennials and their desires, but the jobs themselves. So, you know, we have to have a different type of student. We have to have students who graduate from our K-12 schools, from our technical colleges, from our colleges, at whatever point they're ready to take on the world, and who know constantly how to learn. I've mentioned to you earlier, I saw a survey yesterday of college students who were asked, what do you feel prepared for? And what do you not feel prepared for now that you're in your first year of college? They said they felt fairly well prepared academically, but they wish someone had taught them better how to deal with personal relationships, how to manage their time and take care of themselves from day to day, how to get along with people, just what we would all call the soft skills, the life skills and characteristics, and is what we call it in the profile of the graduate.
Well, that was an interesting point when you were talking about career and college ready and all, but you said citizen ready. Yes. And that was, I thought, very key.
Yeah, that is key.
Well, and those characteristics and skills that we talked about, like being able to convince, a group of people that you talked about project-based learning, being able to convince a group of people that a solution is the right solution and get them to come along with you on this, and how to use the data and communicate effectively using the right technology, what that solution might be to a problem that needs to be solved, is all part of that. It's part of being a good citizen. Now, whether it's a citizen of the world, a citizen of your state, citizen of your town, or in your own family. We all have to deal with relationships every single day, and whether we do it successfully is whether we have those skills and characteristics, life skills and characteristics.
That's right.
And I don't want to leave without giving you an opportunity to talk about the investments that AT&T is making in infrastructure, not just in the schools, but in the state. You are investing in some of the rural areas of South Carolina.
We are, and thank you very much for that opportunity as well. We're very proud of the fact that over the last 3 to 4 years, we've invested $800 million in South Carolina in upgrading our wireless and wireline infrastructure, and over $1 billion in North Carolina. One of the reasons we've done that is because of the growth. Our industry has been lucky to be the recipient of the customers who want our technology and want it wherever they can be. It used to be a phone connected you to a place, right? Your house, to your business, to wherever. Yeah. Now it connects you to people and information and data wherever you are and wherever it is that you can find it. So we've seen 250,000% growth on our wireless data network over the since 2007. What happened in 2007, folks? Smartphones came out.
Yep.
And so we've seen that growth. So we have had to invest even through the economy's downturn. So we're glad that the rest of the world is also now booming and we'll be ramping up for the rest of that too.
That's
that
wonderful,
growth.
great. And so now you're connecting folks in the rural areas, and that's a wonderful thing.
That's right. One of the ways we have to find new and different ways to do that to make sure that the economy of scale works when you are investing in those areas. So right now we have a product that we've been rolling out called Fixed Wireless Local Loop, which is a wireless solution for data to your home, but it includes an antenna on your home, so fixed wireless local loop to bring that data. It's less expensive and therefore effective.
And a whole new world.
Yes.
Thank you all so very
Thank
much
you,
for the
Mom.
conversation and the insight. And thank you for joining us for Carolina Business Review. And remember, you can check us all out on the website at carolinabusinessreview.org. Thanks again. Here we go.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, Bearings, Grant Thornton, Novant Health, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.